Imagine being sealed alive in a wooden chest, left screaming in the darkness as the summer heat turns your tiny prison into an oven. This horrifying fate was not a cruel fairy tale punishment. It really happened to a Korean prince. In 1762, Crown Prince Sado of Korea was locked in a rice chest by royal decree of his own father, left to suffocate and starve. What could drive a king to kill his son in such a nightmarish way? And what terrifying madness could provoke a prince to deserve such a gruesome end? This is the dark, suspenseful tale of Prince Sado's rise and catastrophic fall, a story of abuse, insanity, and betrayal that will leave you haunted and questioning how far a family's desperation can go. Clearly, this isn't just another distant historical anecdote. It's a chilling human tragedy. Understanding Prince Sado's story is important because it shows how untreated mental illness and cruelty at the highest levels can explode into violence with devastating consequences. By delving into this prince's tortured life, we gain insight into the dangers of unchecked power and the neglect of mental health, lessons that still echo today. So, how did a beloved royal child transform into a mad prince feared by all? And why did his own father believe the only answer was to have him buried alive? Let's travel back to 18th century Korea and witness the events leading up to that fateful day. Prince Sado was born in 1735 into the illustrious Joseon Dynasty of Korea, destined to be the next king. As a baby, he was welcomed with joy. His father, King Yeongjo's first son, had died young, so Sado was the precious heir the kingdom had waited for. But Sado's childhood was far from loving or carefree. King Yeongjo was a stern, perfectionist monarch who believed in tough discipline over tenderness. From a very young age, Sado was subjected to relentless pressure to be perfect. Any mistake, any sign of weakness, would send his father into a rage. Courtiers whispered that the king could be angered by the most trivial slip-up, and unfortunately, little Sado often ended up on the receiving end of this royal wrath. Growing up, Sado lived in constant fear of his father. Imagine a small boy walking on eggshells in a vast palace, terrified of making the slightest error. King Yeongjo rarely showed affection to his son. Instead, he berated and scolded Sado openly, sometimes lashing out at him in front of ministers, servants, and even the ladies of the court. The humiliation was public and deeply scarring. Sado's mother, Lady Yeong, one of the king's concubines, was not much gentler. She dutifully followed the king's harsh guidelines for raising Sado, emphasizing strict rules and criticism over comfort. The young prince had virtually no safe haven of warmth or understanding in his formative years. He learned to keep his head down and his emotions bottled up whenever his father was near. From the outside, Sado's life was one of privilege. He had palaces, tutors, and servants at his command. But on the inside, he was a scared, anxious child, desperate for approval that never came. It's said that whenever Sado was summoned by King Yeongjo, he would start to shake with panic. If the king asked him a question, Sado often froze up, too frightened to answer incorrectly, which only angered his father more. This vicious cycle of fear and disappointment set the stage for the turmoil to come. Sado grew into a teenager haunted by anxiety, always anticipating his father's next outburst. At age 15, Crown Prince Sado was formally given some responsibilities in governing, as a kind of training to rule. For a moment, it seemed like an opportunity for him to earn his father's respect. But nothing Sado did was ever good enough. King Yeongjo second-guessed every decision Sado made and sharply criticized him at every turn. The king even forbade Sado from participating in important state ceremonies and ancestral rituals, publicly signaling his disapproval. Imagine the frustration and humiliation of a young man who is supposed to be the future king, yet is constantly treated as incompetent by the current king. Sado's resentment and stress continued to quietly build. During this time, Sado did have one source of comfort: his older sister, Princess Hwayup. She too had felt their father's coldness, and the siblings were close confidants. With Hwayup, Sado could actually relax and be himself for a while, free from judgment. But tragically, this solace did not last. In 1752, when Sado was about 17, Princess Hwayup suddenly fell ill and died. Her death shattered Sado. He was inconsolable, gripped by overwhelming grief for the sister who had been his only true friend in the palace. This was the first crack in Sado's sanity, the beginning of a dark spiral. After his sister's death, those around Sado noticed alarming changes in him. He became withdrawn and morose, prone to fits of brooding. Desperate for some meaning, Sado turned to unusual spiritual pursuits. He read an ancient Taoist text said to hold mystical secrets. According to accounts, while studying this book, Sado experienced a terrifying hallucination. He believed he saw the thunder god manifest before him. From that day on, Sado developed an irrational phobia of thunderstorms and even of certain Chinese characters written in the book, convinced they were cursed. It was as if something in his mind had begun to break. The prince, who had once only been nervous in his father's presence, was now seeing ghosts and shadows. These were ominous signs of the madness to come. Over the next few years, more blows fell upon Sado's fragile psyche. In 1757, two royal matriarchs who had shown Sado kindness both died within weeks of each other: Queen Inwon, his grandmother figure, and Queen Jongsong, King Yeongjo's wife. Sado had been close to both of these women. They had been among the few people who treated him gently. Their loss was devastating. With his sister and these surrogate mothers gone, Sado felt completely alone, and his mental state deteriorated dramatically. He was often enraged or despondent, and the strict Confucian court offered him no outlet for his emotions. He was expected to suffer in silence, but Sado's silence was about to shatter in the most violent way. The breaking point came shortly after the funeral of Queen Jongsong. In a moment straight out of a horror story, Prince Sado stormed into his private chambers one day, holding a bloody, severed human head. In a chilling calm, Sado presented the gruesome object to his wife, Lady Yeongjo, and her attendants, forcing them to look. It was the head of a royal eunuch, a servant he had just brutally murdered. Until that day, Lady Yeongjo had never seen someone killed before her eyes. Now her own husband stood before her as a killer, showing off his kill like a trophy. The court ladies screamed and recoiled in terror. This was the first undeniable proof that Sado had crossed into madness and violence. That incident opened the floodgates. After displaying the severed head, Prince Sado descended into a blood-soaked rampage that would continue for years. He found that inflicting pain gave him a twisted release for his pent-up fury and fear. If anything upset him even slightly, his response was savage. He beat and killed palace staff without hesitation. Eunuchs, maids, guards, scholars, anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path at the wrong time could become his victim. The royal palace became a place of lurking dread, with Sado's servants tiptoeing on edge, never knowing if a misstep or a misspoken word might provoke the prince's wrath. Corpses started turning up around Sado's residence with frightening regularity. According to some reports, nearly every day a lifeless body was quietly carried out of the prince's quarters, a grim routine concealed behind palace walls. The crown prince of Joseon had become a serial killer in silk robes, and no one could stop him because of his royal status. Sado's violence was not limited to murder. He also unleashed his twisted urges on the women of the court. the prince began sexually terrorizing his own ladies-in-waiting, the young women assigned to serve the royal household. He would corner and rape these women in fits of lust and rage. Those who resisted him were beaten mercilessly. Lady Yeongjo later wrote that he would flog and thrash the women until he rent their flesh to break their will. The palace, once a symbol of refinement, had turned into Sado's personal house of horrors. Servants lived in constant fear. Whispers of the prince's atrocities spread in secret, even as officials tried to cover up the scandal of a mad heir. Lady Yeongjo herself feared for her life at times. Though Sado mostly spared his wife from direct violence, one night in a temper, he even struck her in the face with a heavy board, leaving her bruised and shaken. No one was truly safe from the mad prince's unpredictable fury. Amid this darkness, Sado's mental state continued to unravel in strange ways. He developed obsessive rituals and superstitions. One obsession was with clothing. In his deranged mind, Sado began to believe that choosing the wrong outfit or putting it on incorrectly could bring disaster. Whenever he had to get dressed, he would demand that his attendants present him with dozens of lavish silk robes. Sometimes he would burn a few outfits as a sacrificial offering to appease whatever spirits he thought were haunting him. Only after these bizarre rites would he finally put on a set of clothes. But if a servant assisting him made even the tiniest mistake, perhaps tying a sash the wrong way or brushing against him, Sado would fly into a rage. In an instant, the outfit would be deemed contaminated and unwearable, and the hapless servant could be beaten or even killed on the spot for spoiling it. This was how utterly unhinged the prince had become. Even the act of getting dressed was a perilous, potentially deadly ceremony. Remarkably, Sado still sought affection in the midst of his insanity. In 1759, he took a young woman named Ping-ae as a concubine, secondary wife. Ping-ae was a beautiful seamstress at court, and Sado became infatuated with her. He secretly set her up in luxurious rooms and spent time with her, perhaps looking for comfort that he didn't get from his formal life. But when King Yeongjo discovered that his son had taken this concubine without approval, he was livid. The king scolded Sado harshly for this indiscretion, since Ping-ae had once served Sado's grandmother, and the relationship was deemed inappropriate. Sado's reaction to his father's fury was extreme despair. In a dramatic act, the prince threw himself into an icy well, attempting suicide out of guilt and hopelessness. Servants scrambled to rescue him and managed to pull him out of the well before he drowned or froze. Sado survived, but his already fractured mind was now further scarred by the realization that even in his personal life, his father's disapproval followed him everywhere. For a short while, Ping-ae actually remained by Sado's side and even bore him a child. But tragically, not even the woman he loved escaped his brutality. In early 1761, during one of Sado's sudden insane rages, reportedly triggered by a dressing ritual gone wrong, he turned on Ping-ae. He beat his beloved concubine savagely, so much so that she succumbed to her injuries and died on the floor. Sado showed no remorse. In fact, when he returned after her death, he acted as if nothing had happened. Lady Yeongjo herself had to tend to Ping-ae's lifeless body and arrange her funeral, all while knowing her husband was the murderer. This shocking incident proved that Sado's madness spared no one, not even those he cared for. By 1762, Crown Prince Sado's reign of terror had reached unbearable heights. The royal family lived in constant fear of what Sado might do next. His own mother, royal consort Yeong, and his stepmother pleaded in secret for the king to intervene, terrified that Sado might slaughter his children, King Yeongjo's grandchildren, or even assassinate the king himself. Rumors swirled that Sado was plotting something dire. In one outburst, Sado had actually threatened to kill a high official's son after an argument, and some whispered that Sado had tried sneaking through the palace at night, perhaps intending to harm his father. Whether or not Sado truly planned patricide, the whispers were enough. No one felt safe as long as this mad prince roamed free. King Yeongjo realized that he could no longer turn a blind eye or hope his son would somehow recover. Sado's condition had become a mortal threat to the royal family and the kingdom's stability. But how could a king solve a problem like Sado without shaming the dynasty or endangering innocent members of the family? The answer would be as ingenious as it was cruel. On a stifling hot day in July 1762, King Yeongjo made his move. He summoned 27-year-old Prince Sado to an assembly at the palace in front of the court's highest ministers and princes. Sado arrived, perhaps sensing something was wrong, perhaps defiant or frightened. We can only imagine his state of mind. In the throne hall, King Yeongjo confronted his son publicly. Enough was enough. With a voice full of wrath and sorrow, the king stripped Sado of his royal titles, effectively disowning him then and there. He declared that Sado was unfit to be crowned prince or to ever rule Joseon. This alone was a shocking announcement. Never before had an heir apparent been deposed in such a way. But what came next was far more shocking. At the king's signal, attendants dragged a large wooden rice chest into the courtyard. This stout wooden box was normally used for storing grain. It was sturdy, rectangular, and about 4 feet wide, just big enough to fit a person curled up. King Yeongjo ordered his son, "Climb into the box." Prince Sado froze in horror. He suddenly understood his father's intention. This rice chest was to be his coffin. Instantly, Sado burst into desperate pleas. The proud, violent prince was now a terrified man, begging for his life. He dropped to his knees and cried out to his father, wailing that he would mend his ways, that he was sorry for all he had done. Sado sobbed and screamed, refusing to get into the box. But King Yeongjo's face remained like stone. He could not spare his son. Too much blood had been spilled, and too great a danger loomed if Sado lived. The king's solution had to be carried out no matter how grotesque. Guards seized Prince Sado. Amid Sado's frantic cries, they forced the struggling prince into the wooden chest. Sado tried to resist, even attempting to climb back out at one point. But the guards overpowered him. They pushed him down and slammed the heavy lid shut. Nails or ropes were used to fasten the chest securely. In an instant, the mad prince who had terrorized the palace was trapped in total darkness, locked inside a wooden box as the sweltering summer sun beat down. King Yeongjo stood by, watching grimly as his order was executed to the letter. It was a punishment that technically shed no royal blood, thus upholding the law forbidding a direct execution of a prince, and it avoided the need to harm Sado's innocent family under the practice of collective punishment. But it was execution by slow torture all the same. Inside the cramped chest, Crown Prince Sado's ordeal was just beginning. He was wedged in a space so small he could barely move or sit comfortably. The air inside soon grew thin and scorching. The palace guards and family could hear sounds from within. At first, Sado yelled and pounded against the box in panic. One can imagine him in there, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, fists thudding against the wood, screaming to be let out. Hours passed. The sun blazed, heating the wooden chest like an oven. No water, no food, no room to even fully stretch out, just utter darkness and his own rising terror. Sado's screams eventually turned to whimpers, then silence. Day turned to night, night into day, over and over. The king had the chest moved to a quiet spot and even covered it with straw, perhaps to muffle the sounds and the sight of this gruesome act. For 7 excruciating days, Prince Sado languished inside the rice chest. As the days went on, those nearby could occasionally hear faint moans or movements, signs that Sado was somehow clinging to life in that hellish confinement. But by the 7th night, those noises stopped. On the 8th day, July 12th, 1762, the chest was finally opened. Inside lay the once mighty crown prince, now a lifeless, withered figure. Sado had died, likely on that 7th night, succumbing to dehydration, starvation, and sheer exhaustion from the heat. His face was reportedly unrecognizable from the suffering. The mad prince's turbulent life had come to an end in the most agonizing way imaginable. The very method of his death ensured that it was slow and conscious, a form of punishment where Sado had days to contemplate his fate as death closed in. It's a scene so cruel and tragic that it's hard to believe it truly happened. With Prince Sado dead, King Yeongjo exhaled, perhaps for the first time in years, feeling a grim relief that the immediate threat to his family and kingdom was over. But the aftermath of this incident, known in Korean history as the Rice Chest Incident, or Emo Incident, was complicated and heavy with sorrow. Yeongjo had to balance the need to punish his son with the need to preserve the royal lineage and integrity. In an official sense, the king quickly moved to erase Sado's shame. He issued an order forbidding anyone at court from ever mentioning Sado's name or the details of his crimes. It was as if the crown prince had never existed. Sado's closest attendants and confidants faced dire consequences as well. Many of the eunuchs, guards, and even palace women associated with him were executed or exiled, an attempt to wipe out any remaining influence or rumors that might have spread from Sado's horrible saga. Sado's mother, Lady Yeong, who had given birth to him, fell into grief and died just 2 years later, some say from a broken heart, and the disgrace her son had brought. Prince Sado's wife, Lady Hyeong, met a harsh fate too, despite being an innocent victim in this tale. Right after Sado was sealed in the chest, Lady Hyeong and her young children were banished from the palace. She was stripped of her title and sent back to her parents' home in disgrace. Imagine her trauma. She had witnessed her husband's insane violence, then watched him dragged away to a slow death. And now she was separated from her own son, the late prince's heir, for years. Lady Hyeong suffered depression and illness in the aftermath, yet she had to endure it silently, forbidden to fully mourn or even speak of what had truly happened to her husband. King Yeongjo, for all his sternness, understood that the dynasty's future rested on Sado's little son, Yi-san. So, in a strange twist of posthumous justice, just 2 weeks after condemning Sado to death, the king reinstated Sado's title and rank as crown prince, but only on paper, and only after Sado was already dead. This might sound perplexing, but it had a purpose. By restoring Sado's official honor, Yeongjo ensured that Sado's son could still legitimately succeed to the throne. In effect, he declared, "My son was crown prince again at his death, and his offenses are nullified." He even bestowed upon the departed Sado a posthumous honorific name meaning Prince Sado, prince thought of tragically. It was an attempt to frame Sado's end as a tragedy rather than a treason. With this done, Yeongjo named young Yi-san as the new crown prince. This boy, despite the horrifying loss of his father, would survive the palace intrigues and eventually become King Yeongjo of Joseon. King Yeongjo, Yi-san, would reign for over 2 decades and be remembered as one of Korea's greatest enlightened monarchs. But he never forgot the dark legacy of his father. Once Yeongjo took the throne in 1776, one of his first acts was to publicly acknowledge Prince Sado as his father and perform rites to honor him. This was a bold move. implicitly challenging his grandfather, Yeongjo's decree of silence. Yeongjo constructed monuments to Sado's memory, and even built the impressive Hwaseong fortress around his father's tomb years later, as a grand gesture of filial piety and remorse. King Yeongjo was determined to rehabilitate Prince Sado's image, at least to portray him as a victim of mental illness rather than a monster. It was Yeongjo's way of healing a wound that had festered in the royal family. We know so much about Prince Sado's chilling story, largely thanks to Lady Haegyong's memoirs. Decades after these events, Sado's widow, Lady Haegyong, took pen to paper and wrote a detailed, heart-wrenching account of her life with Prince Sado. In her memoirs, she did not shy away from describing Sado's madness, his violence, and the agony of being his wife during those years. But she also provided context, explaining the overwhelming pressures Sado faced, the abuse he suffered from his father, and the avalanche of tragedies that eroded his sanity. Lady Haegyong wrote these recollections in part to defend the reputation of her own family and her son, King Yeongjo. But in doing so, she gave the world an invaluable personal glimpse into the mind of Prince Sado. Her writings confirmed the ghastly details: the eunuch's severed head, the murders, the terror in the palace, and the final horrifying execution in the rice chest. Thanks to her, later generations could piece together how such a nightmare unfolded at the heart of the Korean royal court. In the years and decades after Sado's death, whispers persisted that perhaps Prince Sado had been the target of a political conspiracy. Could it be, some wondered, that rival factions at court had exaggerated or even fabricated his madness to force King Yeongjo to eliminate his own son? This theory arose because the truth was so awful that people looked for other explanations. However, historians generally reject these conspiracy ideas. All evidence points to Sado genuinely suffering from mental illness and committing the horrific acts attributed to him. Both his wife and his son, who had every reason to hate King Yeongjo for what happened, acknowledged Sado's insanity and violence in their own ways, though they remained sympathetic to him. It seems clear that Prince Sado was not a pawn in someone else's game, but rather a deeply disturbed individual, tragically driven to madness by his environment and inner demons. The tale of Crown Prince Sado is a dark, cautionary tale from history. It's a story of how unimaginable pressure and abuse turned an heir to the throne into a homicidal madman. It's also the story of a father pushed to an extreme decision that defies all paternal instinct, choosing to execute his own flesh and blood in a horrifying manner to protect his family and kingdom. In Prince Sado's life, we see how monsters are made, not born. An innocent child, unloved and tormented, grew up to inflict torment on others. We also see the human cost of mental illness in an era that had no understanding or mercy for it. Sado's rampage could perhaps have been avoided with compassion or treatment, but 18th century Korea offered him none. Instead, his unchecked fury led to suffering for countless innocents, and ultimately himself. Prince Sado was both villain and victim. He committed appalling, evil acts, murdering servants, raping women, even endangering his own kin. For that, history rightfully remembers him with horror. Yet, he was also a product of a toxic family and a repressive system that systematically broke him down. In the end, he died a death as cruel as any of the cruelties he had dealt, locked in that wooden chest, dying alone in the dark with his nightmares. It's a sobering reminder that power and trauma can be a deadly combination. Even today, the madness of Prince Sado forces us to think about mental health, empathy, and the responsibilities of those who hold power over others, be it a king over a prince or a prince over his subjects. The story forces a painful question. could this tragedy have been prevented if someone had shown Sado genuine love, or if someone had the courage to intervene early? We'll never know. What we do know is that this chapter of Korean history remains one of its most infamous and heartbreaking. Thank you for watching and listening to this gripping saga. If this story captivated you, please remember to hit the like button and let me know your thoughts or feelings about Prince Sado's tragic life in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating and haunting history stories from around the world. Your support helps keep these important stories alive. Until next time, stay curious and see you in the next video.